Hi, welcome to Grat's Guide to Anything. This is the fifth in a series on running D&D 5th edition on Roll20 and covers the default sheet settings. I always have to pause to say that for some reason. My mouth doesn't want to get around those three words that way. This group of settings will have more changes in it than any other set we've looked at up to this point. The changes we'll make are simply the changes that work with my players. Yours may be different and you'll change some or all of these back. You may change to other settings instead. That's fine. The reason that these options are here is simply because some people want things one way and others want it another way. I'll try to give a brief reason with each change so you can identify any changes that may not be suitable for your group. If you're unsure, start by following my recommended change. You can always change things back later. Also remember that you are not changing the settings on the sheets in your game. Confused? Gets worse. The settings you are changing simply change the defaults when you create a new PC, new NPC. This is really important. Every change that you identify here that you want to make, you will have to manually change on every sheet that you want the change on. Or use the macros that we'll set up later to do this, and that's why we set the macros up, because otherwise it's just so painful. First note, the options you'll be provided with should change based on which character sheet you select. As I've done all of these videos using the D&D 5e by Roll20 character sheet, that is the options I will show. If you choose to go with a different character sheet, the options will be different. So first, our learning objective. By the end of this video, you will be able to set up the default sheet settings in Roll20. To get to the settings is simple. First we select Games from the Roll20 menu, then My Games, then we select the game we want to configure, Grat's Test Game. Again we click on the name, not launch, because we want to get to the configuration screen. Once the configuration screen is showing, we then click on Settings, then Game Settings, then we scroll down until we see Character Sheet Template. We start by confirming that the character sheet is currently set to D&D 5e by Roll20. Second note, the below settings are not for player characters or non-player characters. They are simply defaults for any new of either that we create. As we will be using macros to set up monsters and players, it sort of doesn't matter what you set, but it's still good to set things up the way you want in case you forget to change things. Yes, I've said this before, yes, it needs repeating. Let's go through the settings you should think about changing. The first one is the option NPC. It's a toggle. If the NPC is ticked, then this is a NPC, not a player character. If NPC is not ticked, then it's a player character. So, should you have a default one or default the other? Well, it doesn't matter. It really depends upon where you are in your game. If your players haven't created their characters yet, then by default it's good to have it off. Because that way, when you're, especially if you use one of the auto scripts so that new players can automatically generate their character, you want NPC turned off. Otherwise it really interferes with stuff. But if all your player characters have created their characters, then it's probably worthwhile having it on, because by that point what you're going to be doing is mainly creating monsters, NPCs, stuff like that, and for those you want ticked. But again, we're going to use macros to also set this, so again it doesn't really matter, but it's good to keep it the default as off. The next item I want to talk about is roll queries. Leave it as always roll advantage to start with. What I recommend you do is that when individual players understand the rules well enough so they understand when they're at advantage, when they're at disadvantage, then I manually change this setting on their sheet, or better still get them to change it to query advantage. That way every time they do a to hit roll, it's going to ask them, do you want this at disadvantage, advantage, or normal? Again, this helps them to solidify their understanding of the rules. And once they're fully comfortable with the rules, encourage them to change it to advantage toggle. And then that way they can choose from a toggle at the top of the sheet if they do or don't have advantage on. At that stage, the players can set it to what they prefer. And if I'm playing, then actually I prefer to leave it on. I really don't want to have to spend the amount of effort thinking before I roll, oh, is this advantage or is this disadvantage? Is it, oh, what about, no. I just let it roll with both, and then by the time it's rolled, I've actually usually figured out what I'm at. And so, but that's me. Right? And the whole idea of these settings is to allow individual players to set things the way that they want it. The next one I'm going to talk about is the first of a couple that depend upon how you DM as to what you should set them for. This is whisper rolls to GM. What this is talking about from a DM's viewpoint is really to do with monsters, NPCs, stuff like that, rather than PCs. And it's whether or not when a NPC or a monster does a, for example, attack roll, does it put that into chat so everyone can see, or does it whisper it to the GM so only the GM can see? Which way you go depends upon how you DM. Some DMs do all the rolls out in the open. If a group of kobold all happen to roll a 20 and most of the party are going to die, then it's the luck of the dice. You've always rolled in front of everyone. Everyone knows it. They all look at that and see 5 20s and go, oh no. But they might grumble about it, but they're usually fine with it. But if you're a DM, and what you actually tend to do is you tend to do adjustments on the fly. So if a counter looks like it's getting a bit easy, maybe make it a bit harder and have those kobolds hit a couple of extra times when they normally wouldn't. And alternatively, if it's looking to be a bit hard, or maybe get them to miss a couple of times extra. Those you'll want always whisper on. And that way the players will not be able to see what rolls are happening in the background. For some DMs who do things in the open mostly, but for certain key NPCs will be a bit more secretive, then again you can always change the setting on those particular NPCs so that they do whisper. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing saying you should or shouldn't. And again, especially from the point of view that players will metagame. And if they're able to look in chat and see the formula and see how that roll was calculated, they can come to a pretty good understanding of what sort of monster they're up against in the sense of how many hit die and stuff like that. My recommendation is to leave it just as never whisper rolls. And again, because we'll be actually setting this in the macros for all the monsters and NPCs, that's the time when you make that decision if you want to or not. The next setting that it depends upon how you DM as to what you should set is auto damage roll. If you're the sort of role player that role plays the combats and weaving your words around the rolls to increase the tension and the drama of the combat, you may want to leave this on don't auto roll damage. If you're not that sort, turning this to auto roll damage and crit probably speed up your combat, and probably speed up by a fair bit. Let me give you a fragment of a game and let me weave the words around the plot, and you can see what I mean about it being able to increase the drama of a scene and take a lot more time. Snod rolls his attack. Snod the barbarian goes all out with his massive two-headed axe and gets past the orc's shield. Go on, Snod, roll your damage. Snod rolls his damage. Ooh, that was low. The orc shrugs off the attack and retaliates with his great axe. DM rolls orc to hit. Natural 20. Oh, that's going to hurt, Snod. I better roll the damage. You watching? DM rolls damage. Oh, that's a 12 plus 3 gives 15 points of damage. Wait, got to roll the extra die for the critical. DM rolls the dice again. Another 12. Oh, that's 27 total points of damage. Oh, that's gonna hurt. So as you see, if you actually work the plot and you actually use language and the roles to create a narrative as you go, then having that gap and having it as a separate damage roll does increase the drama of the scene. It does actually make it more enjoyable. But if that's not you as a DM, and don't try and force it, if it isn't naturally you there, it don't work. Don't try it. Yuck. All you'll do is cause pain and misery for everybody. Then have it set to auto damage and crit. Yeah, there's no problem with it. So again, it comes down to how you DM. The next one I want to talk about is proficiency bonus, custom proficiency bonus. Leave it exactly alone unless your group intends to use the optional rules from the DM guide, chapter 9, about proficiency dice. Otherwise, ignore it. The next one that you should change, in my opinion, is add Dex tiebreaker to initiative. This is one that I recommend that you change to speed up combat. When set to yes, the system will automatically add the player or monster's Dex score to the initiative roll. So, a player with a Dex of 8 and an initiative roll of 12 would have their initiative for combat 12.08. What this does is reduce the number of initiative ties, because every tie needs to be resolved. So if you can get rid of most of them before they even happen, then you will speed up that introduction to combat. So again, worth changing to yes, but remember we have to also change this in the macros. Show global save modifier, show global skill modifier field, show global attack modifier field, show global damage modifier field. This set of changes, I do recommend that you change it to yes. They do crowd the character sheet, but it does mean that if you implement macros to, for example, handle bless and curse spells, then it means that you can run a macro to adjust these in the various players, monsters, characters, whatever, and have the rolls automatically do those adjustments for you. If you chose not to use this, it means that your players and you as DM have to remember, I'm currently, I've got a bless spell running, so that's +1 on this roll, and so the whole idea of this is to allow you to choose to do macros which will automatically handle those situations for you. The next one I'd like to suggest you change is add character name to templates. It's worth putting it on by default. It just helps everyone remember who is who. Right, next one is encumbrance. Now this is not because you may have to change it. This is so that you are aware of what is happening. The encumbrance rules that are used are the optional encumbrance rules from the Player's Handbook, page 176. If you do not or if your party does not want to follow those particular rules, you'll need to change it here. But I do recommend you leave it to default. A stack of other stuff that'll tie into it. The next setting I want to look at is one that I will recommend that you do change, and that's ammo tracking. I recommend that you turn this on, and we'll be implementing the macros later on to use ammo tracking. What ammo tracking is that if a player starts off with 20 arrows and fires 6 into the combat, then their inventory will say they've only got 14 left. So it's actually tracking the ammo that they're using as they fight. The last two are ones I need to make you aware of in case your group wants to use the optional rules in the DM Guide Chapter 9 on Honor and Sanity. If you do, then there's two options there for you to turn those scores on to be able to track Honor and track Sanity. If your players or your campaign doesn't do this, then don't do it. It's interesting because they're sort of a bit of a tie-in from other games, especially like Sanity. If you ever played something like Call of Cthulhu, then the life of your character is basically dependent upon how sane they stay. All player characters in Call of Cthulhu will end up insane and locked in a insane asylum somewhere or dead. It really depends upon how long that takes as to how much is you're role playing in that game. So again, if you've got a really horror filled campaign, then maybe you should start tracking Sanity. And again, if you've got a rigid set of core beliefs in the culture, and honor is vital to that, then you may want to track honor. But anyway, that's just those two. So once you've done all that, scroll down, find save changes, and that brings us to the end of video 5. Join us next video where we cover setting up the token marker set. Thanks for watching Grat's Guide to Anything.